Hey creeps, it's Cameron again, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about books, movies, writing, and all things spooky. Happy Halloween. It is October. It is here. Yay. I am so ready for Halloween. In fact, I have already read a handful of Halloween books throughout the month of September because, as most of you know, Halloween kind of starts at the beginning of September for me. In fact, it sometimes starts a little bit earlier in August, even in July at times. But I already read a whole bunch of horror and Halloween kind of books in the month of September. So I'm going to go over all of the books that I read in that month, and then at the end of October, I'll show you all the books that I read for Halloween. Getting into it, I'm going to start off with all of the books that I have received for review, the books that I have already reviewed on this channel. So I'm not going to talk too much about these, considering I've already done full video reviews and written reviews for each one. So I will post my reviews down below in the graveyard and up in the card symbol somewhere up there for you guys to watch, but I'll just talk really briefly on these and then I'll get into the other books that I haven't really talked about yet. The first one I have is Bonesaw by Patrick Lacey. This was a fun, crazy book. I highly recommend giving it a read. I gave it 5 stars. If you want to see my full thoughts on this book, the link will be right here, and you can go give it a watch. Next is Triple Axe by Scott Cole, another totally insane book published by Grindhouse Press. So that should definitely give you an idea of what to expect from this book. It is raunchy and trashy and a lot of fun. So if you're into that, give it a go. I also read We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix, which was probably the most anticipated book in September for a lot of people, especially horror fans. Another really fun book. It wasn't as good as I thought it would be, but I wasn't let down by it, and I definitely still recommend it. And lastly, for the books that I have already reviewed, I have Bedtime Horrors for Adults and Young Adults, Volume 1. This is by Nick Christopher Black, and it has illustrations by George Gonzalez. It is an anthology of 10 horror stories. So you get a page for the story, and then you turn the page and you get an illustration along with it. And that's the format of the whole book. So it's very, very quick to read. It goes super fast. Okay, now getting into everything else that I read. Actually, the majority of these are audiobooks because I did so much reading for review books that I didn't really get to many others that were actual physical books. The first one that I listened to is Trick or Treat by Richie Tankersley Cusick. And the reason I decided to listen to this was because Alex from the channel Hey Little Thrifter was doing a read-along for 3 Halloween-themed point horror books. While I wanted to participate in the read-along, I just didn't have any time considering I work 2 jobs and I'm trying to finish writing a book and I'm trying to read all of my review books and keep up with this YouTube channel, so I was very, very busy. So one day at work, it was just an office day and I didn't have a lot going on, so while I was working, I decided to look up the audiobook of this, which you can listen to in full on YouTube. The audiobook was produced in the early 90s and it has a full cast narration with sound effects and music, and it was amazing. While it is cheesy as all heck, I loved it. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I liked it so much. The story of Trick or Treat is basically what you find in every point horror book. A girl moves into this old house, she begins receiving threatening messages, and she's trying to figure out, who's sending her these messages. It hits all of the same beats as pretty much all of the other point horror books, but that's kind of the fun of these books. They're very predictable, but they're cozy, they're familiar, and it just reminds me of when I was a kid and I would sit down to read these books. So it's a nice, nostalgic, warm feeling that these books give me. So I highly recommend going and giving the audiobook of Trick or Treat a listen. It is a lot of fun, and like I said, the whole thing is on YouTube. There's also 5 other point horror audiobooks on YouTube. One of them is The Ripper by D.E. Atkins, or as it's called in the UK, The Cemetery. That's what the audiobook is called. So I listened to the audiobook of this as well, and I loved this even more. It is so cheesy and so trashy. All of the characters are exactly what you would find in a slasher. You have, your main character who is kind of pure and innocent, and then you have all of the other characters who are annoying and whine all the time because they just want a party. So one Halloween night, they decide to go to the town's cemetery and have a party, but somebody dies, and then slowly they all start getting picked off. Now that might sound like your basic point horror book, but this definitely has a cool twist about halfway through, and I'm not going to say what, but I will say that it's not good. It's trashy. It's meant to be just entertaining. And like I said about the audiobook of this, full cast narration, sound effects, music, it had a really cool rock and roll soundtrack. The voice actors were over the top and very cheesy and cringy, and it just adds to the charm of the book. So definitely go and give it a listen. And sticking with the same theme, I listened to the Goosebumps audiobook of The Haunted Mask 2. I have had this for several years now, and I never listened to it because I didn't really have a cassette player. But then I realized that my car has a cassette player, and I guess I just got used to it and I didn't realize it was there. One day I just happened to look down and I'm like, I have a cassette player. Why haven't I listened to these? So I listened to this one. I have already read the book of this a couple of times, so I'm very familiar with the story. I've seen the TV episode a bunch of times as well. This is just a direct narration of the book. It does have a full cast narration. It does have sound effects and music, so that's really cool. But it's just a different way to experience the book. Like I said, it was produced in the 90s, just like the point horror books. This was produced by Walt Disney Records, so it's got a really great production. It's super cheesy with the voice acting and everything, but it's just a nice time, and it gives me warm feelings. Reminds me of being a kid again. And because I listened to that, I also listened to the audiobook of Deep Trouble, which is equally fun. Again, full cast, narration, sound effects, audio. It's just a good old time. And there are other books in this series. There is Shocker on Shock Street, A Night in Terror Tower, which I have, and I want to listen to that as well. Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, and Attack of the Mutant. I wish they would have done more, but I got to track down the others and listen to those. And lastly, I read a few comic books, and I hope you're not getting a bad glare. If you are, I'm sorry. These are all from Blood Scream Comics, which is a local comic book company that I try to support whenever I can. So this one here is called The Screaming Skull, issue number 1, which is a prequel to the original Screaming Skull film from the 1950s. Really cool black and white artwork, a pretty nice story. It's very simple and very short, but I will check out the next issue in this series. I also picked up Dr. Creep, which is issue number 0. This might end up becoming an actual long-running comic book series at some point, but this was kind of like a test run for Free Comic Book Day. Dr. Creep was one of those television horror hosts. He hosted a show back in like the 70s and 80s, and he was a really big, popular guy here in Ohio. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I did have the opportunity to meet him several times. But it's just really cool that they did this comic and they're honoring his legacy, and I hope they continue on with it. And I also read this comic, which is called Farmer Joe. It is issue number 0 again. It's kind of like a test run to see how it was going to do. And it was really cool, and I hope that they continue on. So those are all of the books that I read in September, and I also started reading a couple of books. I started reading this one right here. It's called Practitioners by Matt Hayward and Patrick Lacey. I am halfway through. I'm probably going to finish this today. This is really cool so far. It is about dreams and lucid dreaming, and it's very weird and bizarre, and I don't know what to expect. So pretty cool. Can't wait to finish this. And when I do finish this, I will be posting a full review, so look out for that. I also started reading Paperback Crush, the totally radical history of 80s and 90s teen fiction by Gabrielle Moss. And this is pretty much like Paperbacks from Hell, only it focuses on teen fiction from the 80s and 90s, like the title suggests. I love children's books from the 80s and 90s, so this was something I was very excited for. Quirk was very nice and sent me a copy, so I will be doing a full review of this probably a little bit later. This is released in October on the 30th, but because I have so many Halloween videos planned, I might have to push this to November 1st when I review it. So you can expect to see my review pretty soon, but not this month. I'm also currently listening to an audiobook on Hoopla. It is the first book of the Haunted Library series. It's called Death Overdue by Alison Brooke. It's just your average cozy mystery. I have about 2 hours left to listen to, and it's okay so far. It's not quite as Halloweenish as I thought it would be, and it's pretty slow. Not great, but I might continue on with the series. We'll see how I feel after I finish. So that is all that I read in the month of September. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Later, creeps.